Great. Good evening once again. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining on Design with EU. So, good evening again. My name is Eugene Adavere. I am the host and convener for Design with EU Weekly. So, for those that may not know, Design with EU is a weekly initiative that seeks to raise the talent of designers in Nigeria and Africa. What we do is we invite experienced designers from all over the country to share experiences, share knowledge on various topics. The aim is so that we will be able to learn, upskill, and be a lot more valuable to ourselves and to the companies that we work for. Right. So this week we are having Fisayo Osilaja. She is a UX researcher at InterSwitch. So in a nutshell, she's someone that basically loves to solve problems, right, from the lenses of UX research, right? She seeks to understand deeply and make informed decisions that will impact useful designs, right? So we would be privileged to have her talk about user-focused rapid design. We all want to be able to dish out quality designs on a consistent basis. So Fisayo will walking us through that and in the next 40 to 45 minutes. So Fisayo, the floor is yours. Good evening once again.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction. And thanks for having me on. Thank you everyone for joining. So do I have access to share my screen?
Yes, we do.
Sorry, hold on please. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yes, thank you everyone for joining again. My name is Fisayo Osilaja. I am a UX researcher at InterSwitch, and yes, I love to solve problems. So this topic is near and dear to my heart because um, I mean, in the UX space, we always talk about users and getting in touch with users and all of that. But in reality, especially when things are moving fast, it's very easy to lose track of users' needs and say, oh, there's no time for testing, or oh, there's no time for prototyping and all of that. So that's why this topic itself is very important to me because we need to keep users in mind even when we're moving fast, even when we're working in a fast paced environment. So, quickly, the outline for today is to go through like today's digital landscape and how it's moving like really fast globally and locally, and then get into user focused rapid design. So, quick methods for prioritizing users, even when things are moving fast, and then having a balanced mindset, so that culture that will enable that speedy movement but also being user centric, right? So the culture, besides the process and the methods that you can use, culture is also extremely important to uphold that. And then obviously conclusion and question and answer. So, and I also hope this can be interactive as well. I'll be asking questions and such as we go along. This is a quote I really like: people ignore design that ignores people. So let's just keep that in mind. So I want to get into today's digital landscape globally and locally. Um, so basically, globally, I'm sure we all know this, but things are moving really fast in the digital space. So internet users over time has skyrocketed, like as you can see from 2012 to 2022, right? So things are moving really fast. We have more and more internet users every year. And then even in terms of digital growth, population is growing, mobile phone users are growing, internet users are growing. So things are just happening really fast. I'm just trying to paint this picture. And then bringing it back to Africa, right? Digital penetration in Africa is accelerating much faster than any other region. So you can see they compared Africa and Asia Pacific, Europe, Arab states, and all of that. And Africa is extremely, extremely fast. Even in terms of startups, specifically in Nigeria, Nigeria and South Africa apparently have the largest estimated number of startups, right? And then even in terms of investments, the startups that are getting investment from, global places all over the world. If you can see from 2020 to 2021, the amount has skyrocketed in millions. Right. So what does this mean? It means that there's a lot of pressure to deliver and to deliver fast. So that means deliver features fast, deliver your products, compete effectively. All of this is happening really fast, and specifically in Africa and Nigeria, right? So, and what happens is when there's this pressure to deliver fast, it's people have a tendency to say, oh, again, there's no time for testing, or there's no time for talking to users. Let's just push this out. Let's push this out. I'm sure they'll like it. And it doesn't always work out that way. So I have a case study to talk about. Um, so does anyone know about the Amazon Fire Phone? I know this has been overflogged. I don't know if you've heard about it, but if anyone can unmute, I hope that's fine, Eugene, for them to unmute and
Oh,
say what.
yes, it is.
Okay, so say what you know about the Amazon Fire Phone. If anyone wants to talk. Okay, I'm not hearing anyone. Um, but we can quickly get into it. But basically, the Amazon Fire Phone debuted in 2014, and it was a serious flop. Like it was really bad. So apparently they took a 170 million loss on the device and had 83 million dollars left in inventory. So they had to eventually even like take it off the market. There are a lot of things that went wrong, but something specifically that went wrong in this case is the fact that they built the Fire Phone off assumptions that they had about their users. They had a lot of really cool features, but like a lot of users actually did not care about them at the time. So a lot of their assumptions proved incorrect. So this is a typical case study, and it happens all the time, of companies not tuning into the needs of their users and then losing a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy in the process. So it's not something that should be taken lightly. Again, I'm sure we have designers on the call and like we know this, but again, when you're actually working in tech, we know that things move fast and you want to deliver, right? So yeah. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the top players in tech like Apple, Google, Meta, Amazon, and a lot of people, a lot of startups are like, they want to be the next Google, they want to be the next Apple or Meta or whatever, right? But these players invest heavily, heavily in research. From Google. So these are just quotes from people in these companies. So from the initial insight to the finishing pixel, Google uses UX research. That's from a team lead in Google. Even Meta, David Ginsburg oversees a team of more than 100 researchers. That's 100 researchers for one app, right? It's important to reflect if you work in tech right now, how many researchers you have for your products, right? Or if you're a designer, how much research you actually do. And if you compare yourself to these top players and how much research they do, there's always room for improvement here. Okay, so then let's get into user focused rapid design. So we know things are moving fast, we know there's a lot of pressure, but what strategies and what methods can we use to design rapidly while still prioritizing user needs? So, some quick methods. These are my personal favorites. Of course, if you have like your own, I'd love to hear them, but these are my personal favorites from experience. There's remote usability testing, lean prototyping, quick surveys, remote user interviews, data analytics and heat maps, and fast feedback. So I'll just get into each of them. So usability testing, is a method that, let's say you've made a design and you want to test with users, right? But when you make it remote, it means someone can be in Africa and you can be in America and you can test that design with them. So remote usability testing is cool because again, you don't have to physically be in the same location. So it actually makes things faster to test and get feedback on your products. Obviously, again, I'm sure like we know this, but yeah, just to reiterate, it makes things faster. So some tools that I personally use and that we use in my team are Calendly to schedule participants. So it makes things faster because I can just send them a link like, oh, pick a time for this usability test, and they can just quickly pick a time as opposed to calling them, oh, are you free on Monday? Or you're not free? Or can we reschedule? Like all of that. Calendly makes it so much easier to schedule participants. And then moderated usability test. So that means like a usability test where you actually want to guide them and give them instructions while they're going through your design. Obviously you can use things like Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams. So that means you can, if we use Figma here, you can make your design on Figma and then, yeah, prototype it and schedule a meeting, and you can carry out the remote usability test. And for unmoderated usability tests, so that means you're not there when they're going through the prototype or your design. My personal favorite is Maze. We use that in my company as well. So instead of having a call where they go through the design, we just send them a Maze link and they're able to click through with instructions. And Maze is really cool because it's able to capture, where participants are stuck, where they're having issues. It captures all of that all in one platform. So it's really cool if you're not physically there. So all of these tools enable for like faster usability tests. And then lean prototyping, this is like one of my personal favorites because when I was going through the process of learning UX, they tell you, oh, do your research and then make a prototype and then test it and then make another prototype, all of that. And it's giving the assumption that yeah, you have all this time to do all of these things. But lean prototyping speaks to making a prototype with only like the key features. So instead of making the whole design end to end and testing that whole design, just like designing a few key features and testing that, because it makes the process faster. We recently started doing this as well in my team, where instead of making the whole prototype, we just, design a few things, test it, improve, design a few things, test, improve. And it just has made things significantly, significantly faster. So I definitely recommend this as well, as opposed to trying to finish your whole design before you start testing, right? It just keeps things faster. And then surveys as well. Obviously, we know what surveys are, but yeah, surveys are very quick, especially when you don't make them long, right? If you have something specific that you want to learn, just make a quick survey and send it out to your users or potential users, right? My personal favorite is Typeform because it's very visually appealing, but then there's also Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, all of that. And then there are also on platform surveys. So you can do like Facebook polls or Twitter polls or WhatsApp polls. Even sometimes, like when sometimes we have customer forums, we invite people to join our Microsoft Teams, and then we just put polls on there so that we can get quick feedback from everybody. And then again, when you make your own in-app survey, so let's say you have a product, you want to understand people's experience with like the checkout process, you can put a quick in-app survey for you to get feedback on their experience, right? So this quick survey is a good way to like get quick feedback as well. User interviews, obviously remote again, as opposed to waiting until someone can physically come either to your office or you physically go and logistics and all of that. You can just have a remote user interview. And again, you don't have to make it very long. You can have a few questions that focus on the key things you want to learn and get it out of the way. Some tools I prefer to use, ChatGPT. I don't know if anyone uses ChatGPT, but this is my favorite thing to use ever. I know people are scared of like ChatGPT taking over people's jobs and all of that, but ChatGPT saves lives. Okay, it makes you move so much faster. So, for example, what I do when I'm short on time is I ask ChatGPT, please come up with interview questions that find out how people view travel, for example. And then ChatGPT would give me a list of potential interview questions I can use. I always have to edit it because obviously ChatGPT is not based in Nigeria, so I have to localize it and all of that. But it really helps in making me move faster as opposed to trying to come up with interview questions on my own. So use ChatGPT, and it's free, by the way. My company pays for like the paid version. I highly recommend for anyone that works in tech right now, if you can push to your manager for your company to pay for ChatGPT, I promise you it is worth it. But the free version is cool as well. Like, no worries. And then again, the same tools to schedule participants, and then the same tools for online meetings. Also, you could just do phone calls or like WhatsApp calls for your interviews. It doesn't have to be like a whole setup, especially for participants that might not be as tech savvy, right? It's not every participant that knows how to join Zoom, especially working here in Nigeria. It's not every participant that knows how to join Zoom or Microsoft Teams, right? So you could just make it simple, like call them or WhatsApp call them, and you can obviously record as well. And then data analytics and heat maps. So this involves in looking at the data from the back end. So there are many tools for analysis and heat maps where you can actually see users' interactions with your app or with your website. You can see where users are clicking, where they're moving their mouse, how far they scroll, all of that, right? Some key tools that I like, Mixpanel. We use Mixpanel in my company. And then there's Google Analytics, Hotjar, Crazy Egg. So again, it's really important to look at how users are behaving. It's not just about what they say, because sometimes what people do and what they say are very different. So this is a very quick way to look at how they're behaving, where they're struggling, and make quick improvements to your app or website. And then again, fast feedback. I'm a UX researcher, so I have to regularly, whenever I'm doing research, I have to keep my like stakeholders, like product owners, product managers, engineers, I have to keep them informed as to the insights that we've gotten from the research, right? But even if you're a designer and you're carrying out research, it's important to keep stakeholders informed, right? Giving them regular updates as to what's going on and sharing quick insights. So, a mistake I feel a lot of people make in this fast paced environment is, oh, like we need to make a whole presentation on the research insights. And presentations are cool for documentation and just to have. But if you think about it, if someone is trying to deliver a product on a tight deadline, you spending a week to come up with like a presentation might not really work well with their schedule, right? So sharing quick insights immediately through messages like, oh, we just carried out this interview, and these are the three key insights that we found, and just sharing them like over messages, it goes a long way. We recently started doing that as well, and it has made things much faster in terms of our workflow, and our stakeholders are even happy about it as well. It's like, okay, we've given them insights, they're improving, things are moving fast as opposed to waiting for a long time for a presentation. Yeah. And then also inviting other stakeholders to observe research sessions. So this is important as well. You're doing a usability test or an interview remotely. It's really important to have other stakeholders, people invested in the product on the call, right? I always love to have like an engineer, product owners, even business people, marketing. I like to have them on the call so that they can see what is going on and they can make changes immediately as opposed to again waiting for feedback before they um, make changes. So yeah, those are like key methods that I think work really fast and again help you prioritize users even when you're working in a fast-paced environment. And lastly, I want to talk about culture. Besides the process and the methods that you need to move fast, um, there's also the mindset that is required to ensure that everyone is staying user centric while you're moving fast, right? It's not just the process. So, some cultural tips, and obviously, I know that these things take time, but staying creative is really important. So, every company, every situation is different, right? We all have our own unique obstacles. When time is limited, it's important to be creative in how you get that fast feedback. For example, there was a time where we had a product and I don't know, the timeline was just quite short. And we're just like, but we still need to test, right? And then we realized that, oh, actually have users in the company that use this product. Why don't we just test with them as opposed to trying to recruit external people to test, right? So that significantly reduced the amount of time we needed to test, and we were still able to get good insights and improve the product. So it's really important to just be creative. If you're having a problem, find a way out. There's always a way out of it. Always a way out of it. So find a way to still prioritize your users even when you're short on time and even with the unique problems you might be having in your company. You could also Google like your specific issue. ChatGPT, you can use ChatGPT to talk about your specific issue. But yeah, there's always a solution for something. User advocacy, it happens where sometimes you might start with user research in the beginning, but over time as you're developing the product, you know, you're not keeping in touch with users as consistently as you should, right? You're not testing as much, you're not all of that. So it's important to just try remind yourself that you are a user advocate. It's important to just anytime there's a decision that needs to be made or people want to move a particular direction, just remember that you are a user advocate and it's your responsibility to fight for your users, because if you don't, then no one will actually. As a UX designer or UX researcher, I think you have a level of responsibility to fight for your users. So always be remember to be a user advocate. See where you can test, see where you can do additional research, see where you can do surveys, and it will honestly go a long way, not just for you as a professional, but as for your business or yeah, client or whatever the case is. And also abandon the belief that there's no time, because there's always time if you make the time, right? It applies to like friends and family, right? When you're saying, oh, there's no time to hang out with them, but like you can actually make time to hang out with them. So similarly, you can make time for user research. Again, it will benefit you and your company in the long run, right? So for example, in a design sprint, let's say you only have 2 weeks to design a particular aspect of your product. Maybe push for an additional week to include user research, right? It will go a long way. And then continuous learning. um I think when UX people actually secure like a full-time position, they feel like, okay, I've made it. So, like, I finally have made it into tech. But you learn so much, not just on the job, but also when you take the steps to like take those classes. There's so many issues that I faced within my company that I wouldn't have known how to kind of wiggle my way out of it if it wasn't through a class I took, right? So continuous learning is extremely important, so that you know how to address problems that come up, so that you know how to the best way to talk to users in this particular instance, right? So it's extremely important. We're in a rapidly changing environment, so continuous learning really helps equips us with the tools to deal with that. And yeah, that's really it. So, in conclusion, we're living in a fast paced tech environment. So, there's a lot of pressure to deliver fast. I understand. I'm sure you understand. There's a lot of pressure. It's crazy. But users should not be neglected in this process. And there are ways to make sure you're still prioritizing users even when you're moving fast. And lastly, it's important to cultivate the right mindset and culture to make sure that there's still a balance between speed and user centricity, right? So, yeah, those are the three key points I hope we're able to take away from this. And I hope I've been able to convince you to make sure to test even when there's no time. Okay. And yeah, that's it. So stay in touch. I put my email, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all of that. I make tech content, so follow my Instagram and my LinkedIn specifically for that. And yeah, if you have any questions, comments, let's go. Let's get into that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Fisayo. That was a really nice presentation.
Mhm.
Short, straight to the point, and really impactful. Thank again.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank
So
you.
we have a from a couple of persons.
Okay.
Um, the first one is from Caleb. He's asking, how does user market research apply when dealing with innovative products that may not yet exist in the market or are significantly different from existing offerings, especially in the light of Steve Jobs' famous statement? that the users don't know what they want unless until you show it to them. Where is the boundary between user research and innovating beyond current user expectations?
Caleb, that's a very good question. I've actually been writing about this recently, like, because I remember that quote as well, like, users don't know what they want. And there's that Henry Ford quote of, if I had asked users what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse, right? And as we all know, Henry Ford ended up making a car as opposed to like a faster horse, right? So yeah, I get you, that balance between innovating and also connecting with users. I think it's important to, first of all, differentiate between market research and user research. So I think with market research, right, for example, Apple does a lot of market research, a lot of contextual inquiry, meaning they literally go to like a grocery store and see how users are shopping to see how they can innovate on that. You know, Apple is really big on innovation. So they go to a grocery store, see how people are behaving, and see how they can innovate on that. I would say that's more market research, right? But user research is when you already have a product or you already want to build a product and you just want to test like the usability of how is the experience like? Can this user go from A to B with ease without any issues, right? So yeah, I mean, if you have a new idea, new product, that's not actually the time to go to the market every 2 seconds and like, because Apple doesn't do that either. You know, they don't go to the market every 2 seconds and like, oh, can you test this? Can you? Obviously, yeah, there should be a line, obviously, innovate and all of that. But there comes a time where even Apple does usability tests. I don't know like the full breadth of it. Obviously, this is still, my thoughts are still a work in progress, but yeah, it's a really good question. I don't think everything needs to be usability tested, but it's still important to keep users in mind, right? So even if you don't usability test, in what way can you look at how users are behaving in the markets to inform the products you're designing? Right? And if it is an existing product or a product that are already like people are already used to and stuff, try and usability test because again, it will go a long way. And again, you don't have to test with everybody, right? I read about how Apple typically tests internally or with family and friends. So there are ways to do things to where not everybody needs to see it, right? But again, even if you're doing market research, even if you want to innovate, it's really important to just pay attention to users' behavior, whether that means, depending on your product, right? If you're doing finance or if you're doing mobility, it's really important to actually look at how users are behaving. Go on the road and see how people are like going from point A to point B and see how you can innovate on that. So it doesn't mean neglect users, it just means, figure out different ways to like connect with them in some way. Yeah. And also, sorry, to quickly conclude, there are also ways to talk to users without really giving them too much information on your product, right? You can ask questions about how they spend, how they just questions in general about their behavior, and that also will give you information that you need to improve on your product. So, usability testing is not the end all be all, but again, that you still need to connect with people in some way or form. You just need to know when to do what depending on the product or situation. I hope I hope that was a good answer. I don't know.
Yes, it was. It
Yeah.
was. Thanks a lot. So Peter is asking, startups may not have users for feedback. How can one test effectively where you don't have users yet?
That's a really good question. So I also do research for startups, right? And again, I would call that more of market research. Um, so you can still go out of your way to find potential users of your product, talk to them, get a better understanding of their behavior and all of that, and use that to inform the direction that your product is going. And as you're developing your product, you can connect with those users again and have them test what you've made. For example, if you're making a product specifically for hospitals and you've already talked to them, right? In that initial market research, it's important that when you start designing, you go back to those people and test with them, because those are your ultimate end users, right? So it's, you can't just talk to them in the beginning and then leave them throughout your product development process and then launch. Like, that's not the best way to go. So that's a typical example of how it's important to test with those potential users. So yeah, you might not have users, but you can start with that market research, start building those connections, and then start testing with them. I hope that answers your question.
Peter wants to say something regarding
Okay.
this particular question.
Yeah.
Peter, please go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, Fisayo, for your presentation. I hope, can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you for your presentation. It's been very impressive and very communicative. We all understand what you're talking about. At least I do, even though I'm not a user, I'm not a UX expert.
Yeah.
So well done. So
Yeah.
the my concern with testing, and I thought maybe I could talk to you to get further clarification, is how I'm a statistician. I believe in getting numbers. So when you talk about testing and speaking to your friends or going back to the users, are there uh, statistical guidelines that really get you to the truth? Because sometimes if you have just one or two people giving an opinion, their opinions are not necessarily reflective of the entire user population.
Yeah.
So to me, are there guidelines in that area, especially for startups who don't have a very large customer base yet?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So yeah, there are statistical guidelines depending on the research method. So for example, when you're doing usability tests, right? That's for a product that has already, or prototype that has already been developed to some extent. Um, Typically the guideline is at least 5 users, right? And apparently, after 5 users, you reach a point of diminishing returns where what users are saying might just be repetitive, or you just will not get as much value after five. People do test with more than five, oh, but yeah, you might not get, again, five for each user group. Sorry to clarify that. So if you're talking to business owners, that's one user group. If you're talking to customers, that's another user group. So five per user group, right? Um, Another thing too in terms of guidelines is sometimes what users are saying is different from what actually needs to happen because people only people only know so much, and it's kind of like Caleb's question. um People might say they want something, and what they mean or what they actually need is something else. Facebook talked about this recently in an article, how before there was only the like button, and then people kept saying, oh, we want dislike, we want dislike, we want this, like a dislike button, right? And it's only through thorough research that they found out, okay, people actually want to like express a range of emotions, from like to happy to angry to sad, all of that, right? And it was only through research that they found that. So sometimes what people say and the deeper insights might be different. I really hope that answers the question. Obviously, when you're doing market research, you need more numbers than five. Market research, again, is different from user research. You're gauging the market, right? So, startups in the beginning, you're trying to gauge the market. You need to know that product market fit, right? So, you can't just talk to 5 people. That's not possible. There has to be a way, I don't know, you can try and survey as many people as possible of people that you think are your target audience. You can talk to a good number of them as well, and even start designing and showing some of these users as well to prove that product market fit. So market research definitely needs a lot more people than usability testing or interviews. But I hope that answers the question.
Yes, yes, it did. Thank you very much. I think the number five that you reference is a very good number when
Yeah.
it comes to user testing as opposed to market
Yeah.
research.
Yes, yes, yes. Mm.
Thanks a lot, Fisayo. There are a couple more questions. I don't know how many you can take, but let's keep going.
Yeah.
So David is asking, if you work in a company that has no full process on research and and analytics, pardon me, but are fully focused on execution, it has worked for them for years. How do you approach getting buy-ins from stakeholders?
The real question is, has it really worked for them for years? Like, that's something we really need to ask ourselves. Some of the best tech companies now do user research. Like, it's a non-negotiable. I don't know of any company that doesn't, right? So that's the thing. I think a lot of companies are guilty of feeling like, oh, this has been working, like this is fine. And don't get me wrong, they might be getting revenue, they might be, sustaining after how many years, right? But imagine what level they could reach if they were, you know delighting their users in the way that the top tech companies do, right? There's a reason why people always go back to Apple products. There's a reason. So yeah, you could be doing okay, you could be doing well, like comparatively, but it doesn't mean that you're operating at the best means possible, right? So in terms of buying, this is something that I think every designer, every researcher faces. Even me that I'm giving this talk now, I don't have, it's not like I'm saying I have the best perfect experience and everybody loves user research and all of that. I'm not saying that either. But in terms of buying, I think it does help to have case studies, even if it's not your own, but have case studies of other companies and how they've used user research to beat the competition, or attain this level of user adoption and user retention, right? I think case studies are really, really helpful. Another thing that I'm learning now is the importance of understanding your stakeholders. So your stakeholders are essentially users as well. As much as you need to research your users, you also need to understand the people in your company, understand what is important to them, what is important to your product manager, what is important to your engineer, what is important to your product owner. So depending on their needs, you might be able to tailor that user research conversation towards them. Because if you're talking about something or an end goal that's not important to them, then they're likely to not really pay as much attention to you. And I've had that experience before. But the more you understand them, also how they work, how best they'd like to see your research insights, and again, if your argument is meeting their end goal and you prove that it can meet their end goal still, as opposed to throw them off or whatever, I think it's easier to get that buy-in. Especially from my experience, it's definitely easy to get that buy-in when you understand them and you're you're speaking to their own needs as well, because everyone has needs in a company, right? Something that's important to a PM might not be as important to like the business person, or might not be as important to like the marketing person, right? So yeah, I think understanding stakeholders is extremely important before you pitch. Just like when you want to pitch like a business idea, right? Depending on the person, there's a way you tailor your conversation, right? So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you very much. Another question from, sorry about this, Ishiolua, Iseolua, I think. How were you able to convince your company on the importance of research, or do you have any tips that might be useful in this regard?
Um, Please, oh, I'm not saying I've been able to convince my company, um, but like baby steps, right? I think I've been able to get on the same page with certain stakeholders that I'm working with, and that has gone a long way. Kind of like what I just mentioned, as opposed to trying to preach, we need to do UX research, we need to do UX research, like as opposed to trying to preach, just understanding them and their needs. There's some stakeholders that I don't even need to pitch to. They just know, okay, we need to test. Like there's no way this can go out without us testing. But there's some stakeholders that might not really understand that. And I have to now understand where they are coming from, what is important to them, how can I help them meet their own goals while still carrying out this user research, right? So again, it's a case by case basis. It really depends on the stakeholder. And in terms of like company wide, that's not something that, I mean, that's something that takes time. That's not something that you can do overnight or through one conversation. Something that we're working on too is having the processes in place to make sure that, okay, we're keeping users aligned throughout the process. Having regular conversations about the importance of talking to users, having workshops, things like that. Again, I'm not speaking as someone that has changed my company culture or whatever, but some things you can do to make small changes here and there. And if you're lucky, you can eventually get to a place where, okay, yeah, we're operating in a user centric way. And even though we're moving fast, we're staying in touch with users. So it takes time. I believe it takes time, but it's something that everyone can be doing like in baby steps. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have two last questions. I will
Okay.
take them at the same time. So the first one is from Patrick. He's asking, please, what typeface is used for representation? What typeface? What font are you using?
I don't know. I'll check. I'll check. I'll
I think
check and get
it's
back.
seen. I think it's seen though. But if you could just check and get back to him,
What is
then
think
okay,
think go pate.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Then the last question is from David. He's asking, how does research work at InterSwitch?
How does research work at InterSwitch?
Yeah.
Um, that's a good question. So currently, we're a very small team, and obviously, as you know, InterSwitch has a lot of products. But currently, how we work is um, people are developing, different stakeholders are developing at different times, right? And they might reach out to us, oh, we need to do research here, we need to do research trying to understand users here, we have this new feature we want to push out, we want to, yeah. So it just, yeah, that's just how it works. They have requests and then we carry out the research, and um yeah, that's basically what we share the insights, and then things change ideally. And then yeah, that's basically how research works. It's a work in progress. Obviously, the research team at InterSwitch is relatively new. That's why we're so small. So we're learning as we're going, and we're also improving as we're going, right? So there are better ways. We're learning, like, okay, there are better ways to share insights, right? Maybe instead of presentations, we're like giving them quick messages, like, this is what we learned here, this is what we learned here. Um, so we're learning as we're going, like the better ways of approaching user research, approaching communication, approaching collaboration. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I hope it does. I hope it does. So I think we've come to the end of tonight's session. Thanks again, Fisayo. This was really, really an educative session. Right. Someone's hands are raised. Okay, I suppose not. Okay, yeah. So I'll drop your social media handles now. Is it okay to connect with you?
Yes, please, everyone connect with me.
Great.
Also follow my tech Instagram page. That's the love of my life. So yeah.
I only have your Twitter and LinkedIn. Could you drop your Instagram?
Okay.
So I'm dropping it on the chat box now. Connect with Fisayo on LinkedIn and on Twitter. So that is pretty much it. So Design with EU, like I said before, is a weekly webinar series where we invite seniors to come and talk on different topics we believe would help the community and its members grow. Right. So we basically are here every single Sunday by 8 o'clock, and our sessions are recorded and are on our YouTube channel. So I'll drop our links as well. So you can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course YouTube. So you can get updates on who we'll be inviting next and what they'll be talking about. So that is pretty much it from me. I am Eugene Atavare once again. Have a nice night, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Eugene. You're doing great work.
Thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Have
All
a good
right.
night.
I hope to keep in touch.
Definitely.